Hey everyone, so today I'm going to be talking about alcohol and marijuana use. So, as we've seen in pretty much all the articles that we've read in this course, the factors that lead a person to developing substance use disorder are very complex and vary depending on the specific arrangement of demographics they fall into. Isolating any one of these groups is a good way to start in understanding the causes of substance use disorder for similar people, but because risk factors are so complex, there will never be a one-size-fits-all solution to reducing substance use disorder. One of the more interesting but also intuitive findings was this article, which looked at the relationship between impulsivity and the history of behavioral disorders and their link to drug use or risk factors for future drug use in high schoolers. The drugs that they looked at were alcohol and marijuana, as well as tobacco. The study surveyed 1,600 high schoolers in Los Angeles and ultimately found that there was, in fact, a link. Also, having a history of impulsivity, which, by the way, was acknowledged to be vague and abstract, but was defined by a lack of self-control and inhibition. It was a separate risk factor from a history of behavioral disorders and vice versa. I thought this was interesting because it shows how complex the risk factors are, that they don't both need to exist for a person to be at risk for substance abuse. I wanted to share this article specifically because it's not an easy risk factor to target. I think because of how common and prevalent alcohol and marijuana use are, we need to be especially granular with how we look at these issues. One of the most interesting articles I looked at got so granular that it took an entirely different approach to studying alcohol addiction. This one took a narrative approach by selecting 5 individuals on the fringes of society and having them tell their story in order to paint a larger picture about the emotional and mental state of someone who is in this in the extreme of their struggle with alcohol addiction. I really like this article because I've always looked at broad strokes survey-based studies like the previous one and felt like they were leaving something out and they lacked an understanding of how nuanced and complex people's views of their own behavior are. The people in this study have a love-hate relationship with their own addiction, even though they may have pushed away their family and friends. They still feel like a kind of affection for and need for alcohol in order to just get by. This article is a look into the headspace of people struggling with SUD. And in my opinion, it makes studies on alcohol addiction that focus on risk factors and statistics seem sterile and impersonal by comparison. That being said, it does focus on people at the extreme, which is not the majority of people. And I think that carrying this kind of empathy and eye for nuance into a broader analysis of the general population would be of great benefit to the more broad approaches. The last article I want to look at is at the opposite end of that spectrum, and it looks at the big changes and their effects. This one looks very simply at the effects of availability of marijuana and dangerous usage in the form of driving under the influence of cannabis. It looks at states that legalized medical marijuana and if instances of DUIC, driving under the influence of cannabis, rose after legalization compared to states that didn't legalize, and it found that it did, in fact, rise. This goes with the theme that we've been seeing in some of the other articles that we've read for this course, the fact that availability of a substance leads to a rise in its abuse. It's in direct line with this article. We read about South Africa and the influence of big alcohol on legislation, and also this article. Overall, I think the key takeaway is that alcohol and marijuana addiction, even though they're heavily studied, are still incredibly complex and nuanced. Whether you want to help somebody struggling with it or prevent a substance use in the first place, the approach needs to be to understand people as individuals and with their own motivations, as well as the broader influences that may have caused them to have those motivations. Thanks.